My mother-in-law called me worthless until she discovered I was the true owner of her house. The woman everyone underestimated. I still remember the exact words my mother-in-law said that morning. "You should be grateful my son married someone like you. Without him, you'd have nothing." The room went silent. My husband, Ethan, didn't defend me. He didn't even look up from his coffee. Instead, he gave me the same tired smile he always did whenever his mother insulted me. "You know how Mom is," he whispered. That sentence had become the soundtrack of my marriage. For 3 years, every insult, every accusation, every humiliating family dinner ended the same way. "You know how Mom is." And every single time I smiled, not because I was weak, because I was waiting for the right moment, waiting for the truth, waiting for the day they would finally discover who I really was. But that day hadn't arrived yet. So I quietly stood up, cleared the breakfast table, and continued pretending to be exactly who they believed I was. A harmless, unemployed housewife with no money, no confidence, and nowhere else to go. That was the biggest mistake they would ever make. When people first met me, they usually noticed how quiet I was. They assumed silence meant fear. It didn't. I simply learned years ago that people reveal everything when they think you've stopped fighting. Especially arrogant people. Especially greedy people. Like my mother-in-law, Patricia. Patricia believed she controlled everyone. She controlled family gatherings. She controlled holiday plans. She controlled Ethan's decisions. And she desperately wanted to control me. According to her, a good wife never questioned her husband. A good daughter-in-law never had opinions. A good woman accepted whatever she was given. She reminded me of those rules almost every day. Sometimes politely, sometimes cruelly, usually in front of other people. "You don't understand finances. Ethan works hard while you stay home. You should appreciate everything this family gives you." Every word landed exactly where she wanted. Everyone around the table believed her. Even Ethan. He honestly thought his salary paid for our beautiful house, our luxury vacations, our expensive furniture, our comfortable life. He had absolutely no idea where our real money came from. And I intended to keep it that way. For now. The funny thing about secrets is that they grow stronger in silence. 5 years earlier, before I married Ethan, I started a small online consulting company. It wasn't glamorous. There was no fancy office, no employees, just me, a laptop, and countless sleepless nights. While everyone else was sleeping, I was learning, building, failing, trying again. One client became 5, 5 became 50. Then companies started referring other companies. Within a few years, my tiny business had grown into something I never imagined. The income quietly crossed 6 figures, then 7. Eventually, I had more money than I knew what to do with. But I never chased attention. I preferred privacy. Money attracts admiration. It also attracts greed. I had already experienced enough greed growing up. I wasn't interested in seeing it again. So I kept my success invisible. When Ethan proposed, I genuinely believed he loved me. At first, he did. Or at least I thought he did. Back then he admired my kindness. He loved that I listened more than I talked. He told everyone he had found the perfect woman. Things changed after Patricia entered every corner of our marriage. At first, it was little comments, then daily phone calls, then unexpected visits. Soon she had opinions about everything. How I cooked, how I dressed, how I cleaned, how I smiled. Apparently, even the way I folded towels disappointed her. It sounds ridiculous now, but constant criticism slowly changes the atmosphere inside a home. You begin apologizing for things that don't need apologies. You begin doubting decisions you already know are right. Worst of all, you begin disappearing. That was exactly what Patricia wanted. A daughter-in-law without confidence, without independence, without power. She thought she had succeeded. She couldn't have been more wrong. Every month, I quietly paid the mortgage. Not from Ethan's account, from mine. The house was legally purchased through an investment structure created years before our wedding. Every document had been reviewed by experienced attorneys. Every payment left a clear financial trail. Everything was completely legal. No one questioned it because no one ever imagined I had that kind of money. Especially Patricia. She constantly bragged to relatives. My son bought this beautiful home. I would simply smile. Sometimes the truth doesn't need defending. Sometimes it only needs patience. Because eventually, the paperwork speaks louder than arguments ever can. One evening, Patricia invited the entire family over for dinner. Whenever she smiled too much, I knew trouble was coming. Halfway through dessert, she lifted her wine glass. "I have wonderful news," she announced. Everyone looked at her. "I've convinced Ethan that it's time to make some changes around this house." My heart remained calm. "What kind of changes?" I asked politely. She smiled. "The kind that finally puts this family in the right hands." Ethan avoided my eyes. That was the moment I realized something important. This wasn't just another insult. They were planning something much bigger. And neither of them had any idea. They were about to start a battle they could never win. The plan to push me out. The next morning, I woke up with a strange feeling in my chest. Not fear. Instinct. After years of living with Patricia's constant manipulation, I had learned to recognize the difference. Whenever she suddenly became polite, it meant she wanted something. Whenever Ethan became unusually quiet, it meant he was hiding something. That week, they were both acting differently. Patricia stopped criticizing my cooking. She even thanked me for making breakfast. Ethan smiled more than usual. To anyone else, it would have looked like peace. To me, it looked like preparation. 3 days later, Patricia invited me shopping. In 3 years of marriage, she had never once asked me to spend time with her. So I accepted. Sometimes the fastest way to learn someone's plan is to let them believe you've lowered your guard. As we walked through an expensive furniture showroom, Patricia casually placed her hand on a leather sofa. This would look beautiful in Ethan's house. I smiled politely. "Our house." She laughed. "Oh, sweetheart, there are some things women shouldn't worry about. What matters is taking care of your husband." I didn't argue. Instead, I simply nodded. People reveal much more when no one interrupts them. She continued talking. "You know, marriages don't always last forever. You should always be realistic." The words sounded harmless, but they weren't. She was testing my reaction. I gave her none. That evening, I found Ethan sitting alone on the back patio. He looked nervous. "There's something Mom wants to discuss this weekend." I looked at him calmly. "What is it?" He rubbed the back of his neck. "Nothing serious. She just thinks we should reorganize our finances." "Our finances? You know. Make everything simpler." I waited. He continued. "Maybe put the house completely under my name." For the first time in months, I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was unbelievably predictable. So, that was the plan. Patricia believed the house already belonged to Ethan. She simply wanted my signature to remove any future claim. The irony was almost painful. There was nothing to transfer. Ethan didn't own the house. He never had. That night, while Ethan slept peacefully beside me, I walked into my home office. A room neither he nor Patricia had ever cared about. To them, it was where I wasted time on little computer projects. They had no idea it was the headquarters of a consulting company that generated more income in 1 month than Ethan earned in an entire year. I opened a secure folder on my laptop. Every legal document was exactly where it had always been. Purchase agreement, mortgage records, property deed, corporate ownership documents, trust agreements, everything perfectly organized, every signature verified, every payment documented. I wasn't worried. I was prepared. There is a difference. The following Saturday, Patricia arrived carrying a thick folder. She placed it on the dining table with dramatic confidence. "I've already spoken to a lawyer." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh." She smiled proudly. "These papers will make things much easier for everyone." Ethan avoided looking at me. Again, his silence hurt more than Patricia's words ever could. Because silence is a choice. He could have defended me. He chose not to. Patricia slid the papers across the table. "Just sign here." I glanced at the documents. As expected, a property transfer agreement. She had done exactly what I predicted. What surprised me wasn't the paperwork. It was how little research they had done. One glance at the official property records would have shown the truth. Instead, they relied on assumptions. Greed often makes intelligent people careless. "I'd like my attorney to review these first," I said calmly. Patricia's smile disappeared instantly. "What attorney? You have a lawyer?" Her voice carried genuine surprise. I nodded. Of course. For major financial decisions, I always consult my legal team. The room became strangely quiet. Patricia blinked. Legal team. She looked at Ethan. He looked just as confused. You never told me you had lawyers. I smiled softly. You never asked. For the first time since I married into this family, I saw uncertainty on Patricia's face. Only for a second. Then her confidence returned. Oh, please. You don't need expensive lawyers. My lawyer already prepared everything. I closed the folder and handed it back. I'm still going to have mine review it. Her jaw tightened. You don't trust this family? I met her eyes. I trust paperwork. That answer ended the conversation. But it started something much bigger. Late that night, my phone rang. It was my attorney, Daniel Brooks. I've reviewed the documents. His voice remained calm. They're legally meaningless. I thought so. There is one more thing. What is it? Daniel paused. I don't think this is just about the property anymore. They've already contacted 2 banks. I frowned. Why? They're asking about refinancing the house. I froze. They're trying to borrow against it. Yes, but because Ethan isn't the legal owner. The requests were rejected. A long silence filled the room. Daniel spoke again. I think they're desperate. That single sentence changed everything. Because desperate people don't stop after hearing no. They take bigger risks. They tell bigger lies. And eventually, they make irreversible mistakes. I looked out the window toward the house Patricia proudly called her son's. She still believed she was in control. She still believed I was powerless. Neither she nor Ethan realized that every move they were making was leaving behind evidence. Evidence that would soon expose every lie they had built. And when that day came, the truth wouldn't just embarrass them. It would destroy everything they thought they owned. The lies began to unravel. There's an old saying that greed makes people blind. In Patricia's case, it made her reckless. After the failed attempt to transfer the house into Ethan's name, I expected them to slow down. Instead, they became more determined. They believed I was the only obstacle standing between them and the life they imagined. What they didn't understand was that I wasn't standing in their way. The law was, and the law never cared about family opinions. Over the next few weeks, I noticed little changes around the house. Bills that usually arrived in the mailbox suddenly disappeared. Packages were opened before I could see them. Ethan began asking unusual questions. How much do you think this neighborhood is worth now? Do you think we should renovate before selling someday? If we suddenly had a few $100,000, what would you do? Each question sounded casual, but together, they painted a picture. Someone was planning for money they didn't actually have. One Friday evening, Ethan came home carrying a bottle of expensive champagne. He never bought champagne. What's the occasion? I asked. He smiled. I think things are finally looking up. For what? You'll see soon. His excitement felt forced, almost rehearsed. That night, after he fell asleep, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. Normally, I respected his privacy, but the screen lit up before it went dark. One message. From Patricia. The investor believes you own the property. Don't say anything until Monday. I stared at the screen. Investor? What investor? I didn't unlock his phone. I didn't need to. That single message told me enough. They weren't just lying to me anymore. They were lying to other people. And that was far more dangerous. The next morning, I called Daniel. I think they're trying to use the house in some kind of investment deal. Daniel was silent for a moment. Can you prove it? Not yet. Then don't confront them. I wasn't planning to. He laughed softly. I didn't think you would. People who lie eventually create their own evidence. Just keep watching. Daniel had been my attorney for nearly 6 years. He understood something most people didn't. Winning wasn't about reacting emotionally. Winning was about timing. On Monday afternoon, Patricia invited herself over. She walked through the front door like she owned the place. I brought lunch, she announced. She rarely brought food without bringing criticism. As we ate, she casually looked around the living room. You know, she said, this house could easily be worth another $200,000 if Ethan made a few improvements. I smiled. I'm sure the owner will decide what's best. She frowned. What does that mean? Oh, nothing. I took another bite. The conversation ended there. But I noticed something. For the first time, She looked nervous. Later that evening, I decided to visit one of my company's offices. Officially, I worked remotely. Unofficially, I owned every square foot of the building. The receptionist smiled as soon as I walked in. "Good afternoon, Miss Carter." The employees greeted me warmly. Some asked about upcoming projects. Others discussed contracts worth millions. It was a completely different world from the one waiting at home. Here, no one saw me as weak. No one questioned my intelligence. No one believed I depended on anyone. As I stood in the conference room overlooking the city skyline, I thought about Ethan. If he had simply trusted me, if he had respected me, he could have shared this life. Instead, he chose to believe someone who only cared about control. That evening, Daniel called again. "I found something." "What is it?" Ethan submitted financial information to a private investment group. My stomach tightened. "Using the house." "Yes, but there's a problem." "What problem?" He listed himself as the legal owner. I closed my eyes. "That's false." "I know." And every document he submitted can now be verified. A long silence followed. Finally, Daniel said something that stayed with me. "They're crossing a line that could have serious legal consequences." For the first time since this all began, I felt genuinely sad. Not angry. Not afraid. Just sad. Because this wasn't the man I married. The Ethan I fell in love with valued honesty. He laughed easily. He dreamed about building a future together. Somewhere along the way, he stopped being my partner. He became his mother's reflection. And reflections disappear the moment the light changes. 2 days later, everything changed. I was organizing files in my office when my phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Hello. Good afternoon. Is this Olivia Carter?" "Yes. My name is Rebecca Lawson from Hawthorne Capital." My heart skipped a beat. Hawthorne Capital, one of the investment firms Daniel had mentioned. "We're calling regarding a property listed in your name." I stayed calm. "Go on. There appears to be someone attempting to negotiate financing using your property without your authorization." For a brief moment, the room fell completely silent. Then Rebecca spoke again. "We thought you should know before we proceed." I looked out the office window at the city below. Finally, the first crack had appeared. Patricia thought she was building a fortune. Ethan believed he was securing his future. Neither of them realized that every lie they told was leading investigators straight back to them. And this was only the beginning. The invitation that changed everything. The call from Hawthorne Capital stayed in my mind for days. Not because I was worried, because it confirmed everything Daniel and I had suspected. Ethan and Patricia weren't simply making assumptions anymore. They were presenting those assumptions as facts. And once false information entered financial records, the consequences became very real. Daniel immediately contacted the investment firm on my behalf and sent certified copies of the property records. Within 24 hours, they confirmed exactly what we already knew. I was the only legal owner of the house. The case should have ended there. But life rarely follows the simplest path. 3 days later, Ethan came home unusually cheerful. He was humming as he loosened his tie, something he hadn't done in months. "Good news," he said. "What happened?" I asked. "Mom is hosting a family dinner this Saturday." I smiled politely. "That's the good news." He laughed. "No, she says she has a surprise for everyone." A surprise. Whenever Patricia used that word, someone else usually paid the price. Saturday evening arrived. Patricia's dining room looked like something out of a magazine. Crystal glasses sparkled beneath the chandelier. Fresh flowers covered the center of the table. Nearly every member of Ethan's family was there. His older brother, Mark. His Aunt Linda. 2 cousins. Several family friends. Patricia loved having an audience. Public humiliation had always been her favorite hobby. As we sat down for dinner, she couldn't stop smiling. Something was coming. I could feel it. Halfway through the meal, Patricia stood up and tapped her glass with a spoon. I'd like everyone's attention. The conversation stopped. She looked proudly at Ethan. "My son has worked incredibly hard these past few years." Several relatives nodded. "He deserves recognition." More applause. Then she looked directly at me. "And of course, every successful man needs someone to support him at home." A few people smiled politely. I simply held my fork and waited. Patricia wasn't finished. She reached beneath the table and pulled out a large gift box wrapped in gold paper. "Ethan, she said proudly. "This belongs to you." Everyone leaned forward. Inside the box was a framed certificate. At first glance, it looked official. Patricia lifted it high, so everyone could see. I had this made to celebrate the man who built this beautiful home. The room filled with applause. Several relatives congratulated Ethan. Someone even joked about how lucky I was to marry such a successful provider. Ethan smiled awkwardly. He looked uncomfortable, but he said nothing. Not one word. He accepted praise for something he knew wasn't true. That hurt more than Patricia's speech. Then Patricia turned toward me. "You should thank my son." The room became quiet. "For what?" I asked gently. "For giving you this life." She spread her arms dramatically. "This house, these vacations, everything you have. You'd never have this without him." Several relatives looked at me, waiting for my response. I could have ended everything right there. I could have pulled the property records from my purse. I could have embarrassed Patricia in front of every guest. Instead, I smiled. "You're right." Patricia's face lit up with satisfaction. Then I added quietly, "I'm grateful for every lesson this house has taught me." She laughed, believing she had won. Only Daniel, sitting silently near the back of the room, understood what I really meant. I had invited him as an old business colleague. Patricia never bothered asking what business. Dinner continued. People laughed. Wine was poured. Stories were shared. Then Mark, Ethan's older brother, raised an interesting question. "So Ethan, when did you finally finish paying off the mortgage?" The room fell silent. Ethan hesitated. "Oh, a while ago." Patricia quickly interrupted. "My son has always managed money wisely." Daniel glanced at me. I remained perfectly calm, because I knew something they didn't. The mortgage payment had been processed 3 days earlier, from my business account, just like every month before. After dessert, Daniel quietly excused himself. 10 minutes later, my phone vibrated. One message. "Check your email." I opened it discreetly beneath the table. Inside was a forwarded letter from Hawthorne Capital. The investigation had officially expanded. Another company had reported suspicious ownership claims connected to the same property. This wasn't one misunderstanding anymore. Multiple financial institutions had received inaccurate information. Daniel had written only one sentence beneath the email. "They're digging themselves deeper." As we prepared to leave, Patricia stopped me near the front door. She lowered her voice. "You looked very quiet tonight." "I was listening." "You should. After all." She smiled coldly. "This family belongs to my son." I looked directly into her eyes. "No, Patricia." "What?" I said. "This family belongs to Truth." She frowned. "What does that even mean?" I smiled. "You'll understand soon." On the drive home, Ethan finally spoke. "Why did you say that to Mom?" I only answered her. "You embarrassed her." I turned toward him. Did I? Or was she embarrassed by something she doesn't know yet? His hands tightened around the steering wheel. "What are you talking about?" I looked out the window. The truth has a way of introducing itself. Neither of us spoke for the rest of the drive. The following Monday morning, Patricia's confidence disappeared for the first time, because an official envelope arrived at her house. Not from me, not from Daniel, but from a legal compliance department requesting clarification about statements made regarding ownership of a residential property. She stared at the letter in disbelief. Then she immediately called Ethan. "What did you tell those people?" "I didn't do anything. They're asking questions." Neither of them realized the investigation had already begun. And somewhere inside a downtown office building, a team of investigators was comparing signatures, financial records, property deeds, and bank applications. The lies that once sounded so convincing were now becoming evidence. The truth they never saw coming. Monday morning began like any other. The sun poured through the kitchen windows. Coffee brewed quietly. Ethan sat across from me, pretending everything was normal. But I could see it in his eyes. He hadn't slept. His phone hadn't stopped buzzing since Patricia received that legal notice. Every few minutes, another message appeared. "Mom, call me." "Mom, this is getting serious." "Mom, don't say anything until we talk." He flipped the phone over, hoping I hadn't noticed. I had. I simply chose not to mention it. Sometimes silence makes people reveal more than questions ever could. Around noon, my phone rang. It was Daniel. I've got an update. I'm listening. Hawthorne Capital has officially withdrawn from the deal. That was expected. There's more. Daniel paused. They've also shared their findings with the lender who received Ethan's application. I closed my laptop. And the lender has frozen the application pending verification. So they know. They know the ownership information doesn't match public records. I thanked him and ended the call. Everything was unfolding exactly as it should. Not because I wanted revenge. Because truth has its own momentum. Once it starts moving, it's almost impossible to stop. That evening, Patricia burst through our front door without knocking. Her face was pale. She clutched a folder so tightly that the papers inside were bent. Ethan! He rushed into the living room. Mom, what's wrong? She threw the folder onto the coffee table. They think we lied. Ethan looked at the documents. His hands began to shake. What do you mean? They're asking for proof that you own this house. The room fell silent. Then Patricia looked at me. For the first time in years, there was no arrogance in her voice. Only frustration. You've always handled paperwork around here. Can you help us sort this out? I looked at her calmly. I don't think I can. Why not? Because I don't own your paperwork. She frowned. No. You own this house. Her words hung in the air. I slowly shook my head. I never said that. Patricia looked confused. What are you talking about? You've spent years telling everyone Ethan bought this home. She nodded. Because he did. Did he? She looked toward Ethan. He couldn't answer. He had never seen a deed. He had never signed a mortgage. He had simply assumed the payments came from our shared life together. The same assumption Patricia had repeated to everyone else. I walked quietly to my office. A few moments later, I returned with a simple blue folder. No drama. No anger. No raised voice. I placed it gently on the coffee table. What's this? Ethan asked. The truth. He opened the folder. The first page was the official property deed. The second contained the purchase records. The third showed years of mortgage payments. Every single payment came from one account. My business account. Patricia grabbed the papers. This can't be right. It is. No. There must be some mistake. There isn't. She flipped through page after page. Every document carried the same name. Olivia Carter. Mine. Not Ethan's. Not Patricia's. Mine. The room became painfully quiet. Ethan stared at me as if he were looking at a complete stranger. You bought this house. Yes. You've been paying for everything. Yes. All these years. Yes. He slowly sat down. I know what you thought. You never corrected me. I looked at him sadly. You never asked. Patricia suddenly slammed the folder shut. So you've been hiding money from my son. I didn't react. No. I protected what I built before I ever met him. You tricked us. I never lied. You let people believe Ethan paid for everything. I met her eyes. I never told anyone that. You did. Actually. I shook my head. You did. Every family dinner. Every holiday. Every conversation. She had created the story herself. I had simply refused to argue with it. Just then, the doorbell rang. Ethan opened the door. Daniel stepped inside carrying another envelope. Good afternoon. Patricia glared at him. Who are you? My name is Daniel Brooks. I'm Olivia's attorney. The color drained from Patricia's face. Attorney. The word suddenly made sense. Every conversation. Every delay. Every refusal to sign. Daniel placed the envelope on the table. This contains formal confirmation of property ownership, payment history, and legal correspondence regarding the recent financial applications. He looked directly at Ethan. You should read it carefully. For nearly 10 minutes, no one spoke. Only the sound of turning pages filled the room. Finally, Ethan whispered, I can't believe this. I looked at him gently. You believed I had nothing. You believed I needed saving. But the truth is, I spent years protecting this family. His eyes filled with regret. I was wrong. I nodded. Yes, you were. Patricia stood abruptly. This isn't over. She grabbed her purse and headed toward the door. Before leaving, she turned back. You may own the house, but Ethan is still my son. I answered quietly, and he's still responsible for the choices he made. She slammed the door behind her. The silence that followed felt heavier than any argument. Ethan remained seated, staring at the property deed in his hands. For the first time, he understood that the woman he had underestimated was the one who had built the life he proudly claimed as his own. But the greatest shock was still waiting, because Daniel had one final piece of news. He looked at me and said, "Olivia, the investigators want to meet tomorrow. They've uncovered something even bigger." And judging by the expression on Daniel's face, whatever they had found was about to change all of our lives forever. The investigation turns against them. The next morning, I arrived at Daniel's office 15 minutes early. Punctuality had always been a habit of mine. When life becomes complicated, discipline keeps emotions from making decisions. Daniel greeted me with a serious expression. "I wish this meeting were about the house," he said. "But it isn't." That immediately caught my attention. "What happened?" He slid a thick file across the conference table. "The investigators found something unexpected." I opened the folder. Inside were copies of bank applications, investment proposals, and several emails. At first glance, they looked ordinary. Then I noticed one detail. My home address appeared on every document, but my name didn't. Instead, Ethan had signed as the legal homeowner. I slowly looked up. "How many?" Daniel sighed. Seven separate applications. I took a deep breath. They kept trying after every rejection. Exactly. Every rejection should have told them to stop. Instead, they searched for another bank. Then another. Then another. Greed had replaced common sense. "What happens now?" I asked. Daniel folded his hands. "Most likely, each institution will conduct its own review. And if they determine the information was intentionally false," he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. "The consequences could be severe. Not because of the money, because trust is everything in finance. The moment trust disappears, everything else begins to fall apart." Meanwhile, across town, Patricia was doing everything she could to control the damage. She called relatives before anyone else could. She insisted there had been a misunderstanding. She claimed the paperwork was confusing, but every new explanation contradicted the last. Within days, family members stopped believing her. Questions spread quickly. If Ethan didn't buy the house, who did? If Olivia owned everything, why did Patricia keep saying otherwise? The family gossip Patricia had controlled for years had finally turned against her. That evening, Ethan asked if we could talk. We sat on the back porch where we had once planned vacations, birthdays, and dreams. Now, there was only silence. Finally, he spoke. "Why didn't you tell me about your company?" I looked out at the sunset. When we met, my business was still growing. And later, I wanted someone to love me, not my success. He lowered his head. "I did love you. I believe you. But somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing me." He didn't argue, because he couldn't. Every important decision in our marriage had slowly become Patricia's decision. He simply followed. "I owe you an apology," he whispered. "You do. I don't expect forgiveness. I know. His voice cracked. "I don't know how everything became such a mess." I answered honestly. "It didn't happen overnight. It happened one small choice at a time. Every time he stayed silent while Patricia insulted me. Every time he chose comfort over honesty. Every time he assumed instead of asking. Those small choices had built the life we were now living." The following afternoon, Daniel called again. "They've scheduled formal interviews." "With who?" "Ethan, Patricia, and possibly anyone connected to the financial applications." I closed my eyes. "So it's official?" "Yes. This has moved beyond simple paperwork." News traveled faster than any of us expected. One of Ethan's coworkers had heard about the investigation. By Friday, the entire office was whispering. His manager called him into a meeting. When he came home that evening, he looked exhausted. They placed me on administrative leave. I felt genuinely sorry for him. Not because he had been treated unfairly, but because he had thrown away years of hard work for something that never belonged to him. Late that night, Patricia arrived again. This time, she wasn't angry. She was desperate. She sat across from me with tears in her eyes. "I made mistakes. I stayed quiet. I only wanted the best for my son." I looked at her calmly. "No, you wanted control." She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again, because deep down, she knew it was true. For years, she had measured love by power, respect by obedience, family by ownership. Now, she was discovering that none of those things could survive the truth. Before leaving, Patricia stopped at the front door. She turned toward me. "What happens now?" I answered with complete honesty. "That depends on the choices you make next." For the first time since I had known her, she had no response. She quietly walked away. The next morning, my phone rang. It was Daniel. His voice was unusually calm. "I just received confirmation." Confirmation of what? The investigators finished reviewing every financial record. And he paused. They found the email. What email? The one where Patricia instructed Ethan to continue claiming ownership despite knowing the applications had already been rejected. I closed my eyes. That single email changed everything. It proved the false statements weren't accidental. They were intentional. Daniel took a slow breath before speaking again. "They've asked both of them to appear next week." I looked out the living room window at the house I had worked so hard to build. For years, those walls had witnessed disrespect, silence, and manipulation. Now, they were about to witness accountability. And as painful as the journey had been, I finally understood something. Justice doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes, it arrives quietly. One document, one signature, one undeniable truth at a time. The day everything fell apart, the following Tuesday arrived with an eerie sense of calm. It was the day Ethan and Patricia had been asked to attend their formal meeting with the investigators. No courtroom, no television cameras, no dramatic speeches, just a conference room, a stack of documents, and the truth. Sometimes, that's all it takes to change a person's life forever. I wasn't required to attend. Daniel had already submitted every document proving my ownership of the house and my financial records. Still, I sat quietly in his office waiting. Not because I wanted to watch anyone suffer, but because I had spent years waiting for the truth to matter. At exactly 10:17 a.m., Daniel's phone rang. He answered, listened for nearly 2 minutes, then slowly hung up. "Well?" I asked. He leaned back in his chair. "They've admitted everything." I stared at him. "Everything." He nodded. Ethan admitted he signed the applications without ever verifying ownership. And Patricia? She admitted encouraging him because she believed the house would eventually belong to him anyway. I closed my eyes. There it was. Not an excuse. Not another lie. A confession. Later that afternoon, Ethan asked if we could meet one last time. We met at a quiet park near the river. The same place where he had proposed to me 4 years earlier. Back then, we talked about dreams. Now we talked about endings. He looked older than I remembered. Not because of time. Because regret has a way of aging people overnight. "I'm sorry," he said as soon as we sat down. "I know. No, I don't think you do." He took a deep breath. "I wasn't just wrong about the house. I was wrong about you." Those words hit harder than I expected. For years, I'd wanted him to understand. Now that he finally did, it was too late. "I let my mother decide what kind of wife you were." "I know. I never asked who you really were." "No. I just assumed." I nodded, and assumptions destroyed our marriage. He looked down at the ground. "I thought providing a paycheck made me important." "You were important, but not because of money." He looked at me with tears in his eyes. "I understand that now." I smiled sadly. "I wish you had understood it sooner." A week later, the investigation officially concluded. No criminal charges were filed. The financial institutions determined that no money had actually been released because the applications had been stopped before approval. But the consequences were still severe. Every application had been permanently flagged. Several banks closed Ethan's pending financial accounts. His employer terminated his position, citing violations of company ethics and trust. The investment firms withdrew every opportunity they had offered. His professional reputation, built over 15 years, disappeared in a matter of days. Not because I exposed him, because his own actions finally caught up with him. Patricia faced consequences of her own. For the first time in decades, the family stopped believing her version of events. Relatives who once admired her began keeping their distance. The family gatherings she had controlled for years became noticeably smaller. People no longer asked for her advice. They questioned her honesty. Control, I realized, is a fragile thing. The moment people stop believing your words, it disappears. 2 weeks later, I received divorce papers. This time, they weren't a surprise. Daniel reviewed every page. Everything was straightforward. No arguments over the house. No arguments over finances. There couldn't be. The documents already proved what belonged to whom. When I signed my name, I didn't feel victorious. I felt free. There is a difference. Revenge leaves bitterness. Freedom leaves peace. The following month, I made a decision that surprised everyone. I sold the house. Not because I had to. Because I no longer wanted to live inside a place filled with painful memories. The property sold quickly. The sale funded something I dreamed about for years. A new headquarters for my company. A place where ideas, not egos, would shape the future. On the first day the office opened, I stood alone in the lobby before any employees arrived. The sunlight streamed through the glass walls. Everything felt new. For the first time in years. So did I. 3 months later, I unexpectedly ran into Patricia at a local cafe. She looked different, quieter, older. Life had humbled her in ways that no argument ever could. She hesitated before approaching my table. "May I sit down?" I nodded. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. Finally, she broke the silence. I spent years trying to control everything. I listened, and in the end, I lost the only family I was trying to protect. There was no anger in her voice, only regret, real regret. "I should have treated you like a daughter," she whispered. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I said quietly, "You still had the chance." Tears filled her eyes. She understood exactly what I meant. Some opportunities never come back. As I walked out of the cafe, my phone buzzed. It was Daniel. "Congratulations." "For what?" "The board just approved the expansion." I smiled. Our company was opening its first international office. The dream I'd built alone in front of a laptop years ago had become something far bigger than I'd ever imagined. I looked up at the bright afternoon sky and took a deep breath. Losing my marriage had once felt like the end of my life. Now I could finally see it for what it truly was. It wasn't an ending. It was the moment I stopped living for other people's approval and started living for myself. And that, more than owning any house or winning any argument, was the greatest victory of all. The comeback they never expected. 6 months passed. For the first time in years, my life was peaceful. No unexpected phone calls. No criticism over dinner. No one questioning my worth. I had moved into a modern home overlooking a quiet lake just outside the city. It wasn't the biggest house I could afford, but it felt like home. Every room represented something I hadn't felt in a long time. Freedom. Meanwhile, my company was growing faster than ever. We had expanded into 3 new states, signed contracts with several Fortune 500 clients, and doubled our workforce in less than a year. The little consulting business I had built from my kitchen table had become one of the fastest-growing firms in the region. Success wasn't loud. It was steady, and it was built on trust. One Monday morning, my executive assistant, Mia, knocked on my office door. "You have an appointment request." "From who?" She hesitated. "You may want to see this." She handed me a business card. The name made me freeze. Ethan Brooks. I stared at the card for several seconds. What does he want? He wouldn't say. He only asked for 10 minutes. I leaned back in my chair. Part of me wanted to refuse immediately, but another part of me wanted closure. Real closure. Schedule him for Friday. Friday arrived. At exactly 10 o'clock, Ethan walked into my office. He stopped in the doorway. For a moment, he simply looked around. The glass walls, the awards, the employees moving confidently through the building. My name displayed outside the executive office. He finally understood the scale of what I had built. "I never imagined," he whispered. I smiled politely. Most people didn't. He sat down across from me. There was no arrogance left in him, only humility. "I owe you more than an apology," he began. "You already apologized." "I know, but apologies don't repair damage." He was right. Some things couldn't be repaired. I've spent months thinking about everything. I realized something. I waited. I never lost my marriage because you owned a house. I lost it because I stopped respecting the person I married. His honesty surprised me. People often change after losing everything. Very few admit why they lost it. "I don't expect another chance," he continued. I only wanted you to know. You were always enough. The words would have meant everything 3 years earlier. Now, they simply brought peace. Thank you, I said softly. He smiled. I guess this is goodbye. I think it is. He stood, shook my hand, and quietly left. As the elevator doors closed behind him, I realized something important. Forgiveness doesn't always mean rebuilding a relationship. Sometimes, it simply means refusing to carry yesterday into tomorrow. A few weeks later, another unexpected visitor arrived. This time, it was Patricia. She looked nervous standing in the reception area. The confident woman, who once controlled every room, now seemed unsure of every step. I invited her into my office. She didn't waste time. I came to return something. She placed a small velvet box on my desk. Inside was my grandmother's vintage brooch, the one that had mysteriously disappeared shortly after my wedding. I found it while cleaning. She couldn't meet my eyes. I should have returned it years ago. I carefully picked it up. My grandmother had worn it on every important occasion of her life. I'd searched for it for months. You knew where it was? She nodded. I was angry. I wanted to prove that nothing in this family belonged to you. Silence filled the room. Finally, she whispered, I'm ashamed of the woman I became. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse her. I simply closed the box. You can't change the past. I know, but you can decide who you become next. Tears rolled down her cheeks. She thanked me and quietly walked away. That was the last time I ever saw her. A year after the divorce, my company hosted its annual leadership conference. More than 500 employees filled the ballroom. Investors, clients, and business leaders attended from across the country. As I stepped onto the stage, I looked across the audience. Many people knew my success story. Very few knew the pain behind it. I smiled and began my speech. There was a time when people measured my value by what they thought I didn't have. They saw a quiet woman and assumed she had no voice. They saw kindness and mistook it for weakness. They saw silence and confused it with surrender. I paused. The greatest lesson I've ever learned is this. You never need to prove your worth to people who have already decided to underestimate you. The only opinion that truly shapes your future is the one you have about yourself. The room erupted into applause. That evening, after the conference ended, I stood alone on the rooftop terrace overlooking the city lights. Daniel joined me. You did well today. We did. He smiled. You know, I've handled hundreds of legal cases, but yours taught me something. What was that? He looked across the skyline. Justice isn't always about winning in court. Sometimes justice is simply living the life someone else tried to take from you. I smiled. He was right. As I drove home that night, my phone buzzed with a notification. Breaking business news. My company had officially been ranked among the top 50 fastest-growing private companies in the country. I pulled over, looked at the headline, and smiled. Years ago, I had cried myself to sleep wondering why I would never be enough for the people I loved. Tonight, I finally had the answer. I had always been enough. They simply lacked the wisdom to see it. And that realization was worth far more than any house, any fortune, or any revenge. The legacy of the truth. 2 years later, life looked completely different. The pain that had once defined my mornings had become a distant memory. My company now had offices in 4 cities. We had expanded internationally, hired hundreds of talented people, and launched a scholarship program for young women who wanted to start businesses of their own. Every year, I stood on the stage and told the same story. Not about betrayal, not about the house, but about believing in yourself when no one else does. That message seemed to reach people far more than any tale of revenge ever could. One autumn afternoon, Daniel walked into my office carrying a familiar brown envelope. I have something you should see. I smiled. Hopefully it's good news this time. He laughed. It is. Inside the envelope was a letter from a local community organization. They wanted to honor me with an award for supporting women entrepreneurs and funding educational programs. I stared at the letter for a long moment. Years ago, Patricia had said I would never contribute anything meaningful to the family. Now, strangers believed I had contributed something meaningful to society. Life has an interesting sense of balance. A week before the ceremony, I received another unexpected phone call. It was Mark, Ethan's older brother. We hadn't spoken since the divorce. Hi, Olivia. Hi, Mark. I know this is unexpected. It is. I was wondering if you'd be willing to meet. There was something different about his voice. No pride. No judgment. Just sincerity. I agreed. We met at a quiet cafe downtown. After ordering coffee, Mark looked at me with obvious regret. I owe you an apology. You never mistreated me. I stayed silent. His words reminded me of Ethan. Sometimes silence hurts just as much as cruelty. I watched Mom criticize you for years. I should have stopped it. I appreciated his honesty. It's never easy standing up to someone you love. No, but that's exactly when it matters most. He nodded slowly. You taught all of us that. Before we left, Mark handed me a small photo album. What's this? I thought you should have it. Inside were photographs from the early days of my marriage. Pictures from birthdays, family barbecues, holiday dinners. Then I reached the final page. There was one photograph I had never seen before. It showed me standing in the kitchen during my first Christmas with the family. I was smiling while preparing dinner. Everyone else was sitting comfortably in the living room. On the back of the photo, someone had written, "She always gives more than she receives." I closed the album quietly. That sentence captured my entire marriage. A month later, the community awards ceremony arrived. The ballroom was filled with local business owners, nonprofit leaders, students, and journalists. When my name was announced, the audience stood and applauded. As I walked toward the stage, I remembered the woman I used to be. The woman who questioned herself every single day. The woman who believed that staying quiet would eventually earn acceptance. She no longer existed. At the podium, I smiled and looked across the crowd. I'd like to dedicate this award to every person who has ever been underestimated. The audience became silent. There will always be people who decide your value before they truly know you. They'll judge your appearance. They'll judge your job. They'll judge your silence. But never allow someone else's opinion to become your identity. Your worth isn't determined by how loudly people praise you. It's determined by the character you show when no one is watching. The applause lasted nearly a full minute. Later that evening, as I stepped outside the venue, I noticed someone standing across the street. It was Patricia. She hadn't come inside. She simply stood there, watching from a distance. For a moment, our eyes met. She slowly nodded, not proudly, not bitterly, just respectfully. I nodded back. Neither of us crossed the street. Some relationships don't need another conversation. They simply need acceptance. Then she turned and walked away. It was the last time I ever saw her. 6 months later, another surprise arrived. My company had been selected to partner with a national organization to mentor first-time entrepreneurs. During one of the workshops, a young woman approached me after my presentation. She looked nervous. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. How did you survive when everyone around you doubted you?" I smiled because I remembered asking myself that same question years earlier. I stopped trying to convince the wrong people. She looked confused. I continued, "The day you stop asking people to recognize your value is the day you finally discover it yourself." She smiled through tears. I needed to hear that. I realized then that my story had never really been about a house, or a marriage, or even betrayal. It had always been about self-worth. That night, I returned home, made a cup of tea, and sat on my balcony overlooking the lake. The air was cool. The sky was clear. My phone buzzed with a message from Daniel. "Congratulations. Your company just passed $1 billion in total lifetime contracts." I stared at the screen in disbelief. Years ago, people had called me worthless. Now, I had built something that created opportunities for thousands of families. Success had never been about proving Patricia wrong. It had been about proving to myself that I was capable of building a life no one could take away. And as I looked at the stars above, I smiled, because I finally understood something that had taken me years to learn. The greatest revenge isn't watching someone else lose. It's building a life so full of purpose that the people who once underestimated you become nothing more than a chapter in your story. The final lesson. 5 years later, if someone had met me for the first time, they would have seen a confident CEO, a successful entrepreneur, and a woman who seemed to have everything figured out. They would never have guessed how many nights I once cried myself to sleep, or how many mornings I questioned my own worth. Pain has a strange way of disappearing, not because it never happened, but because healing slowly gives it less space to live. My company had grown far beyond anything I had imagined. We now operated in several countries. Thousands of employees trusted us with their careers. Young entrepreneurs often asked how I had managed to build something so successful. Most expected me to talk about business strategies. Instead, I always told them the same thing. Success begins the day you stop asking permission to believe in yourself. That sentence became the foundation of every leadership seminar I gave. Because it was true. One Friday afternoon, my assistant walked into my office. "You have one last visitor." "I don't remember scheduling anyone." "You didn't." She smiled gently. "I think you'll want to see him." A few moments later, Ethan stepped into the office. For a second, neither of us spoke. 5 years had changed both of us. He looked healthier, calmer. The bitterness that once lived behind his eyes had disappeared. He was carrying a small notebook. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all." He sat down carefully. "I've wanted to thank you for a long time." I smiled. "You already apologized years ago." "This isn't another apology." He placed the notebook on my desk. I started over. I opened it. Inside were sketches, business plans, handwritten goals, and pages of personal reflections. I went back to school. I studied ethics, leadership, and financial management. I finally learned the things I thought I already knew. I looked up. "I'm happy for you." He smiled. "For the first time in my life. I earned something without pretending it belonged to me." Before leaving, Ethan stopped at the door. I used to think success meant owning impressive things. He looked around my office. "Now I know success is becoming someone you can respect when you look in the mirror." I nodded. "I hope you keep becoming that person." He smiled. "I intend to." Then he quietly walked away. That was the last conversation we ever had. And somehow, it felt exactly the way it was supposed to end. A few months later, my company celebrated its 10th anniversary. Employees from around the world gathered at our headquarters. Some had been with me from the very beginning. Others had joined only recently. Looking around the room, I realized something remarkable. This company had never just been about profit. It had become a family built on respect. Something I had searched for my entire married life. When I stepped onto the stage, the room became silent. I looked at every face before speaking. There was a time when I believed staying quiet would keep the peace. It didn't. There was a time when I believed love meant accepting disrespect. It doesn't. There was a time when I believed my value depended on someone else's approval. I was wrong. The audience listened carefully. I've learned that kindness is powerful. But kindness without self-respect becomes permission for others to hurt you. So be kind. Be generous. But never shrink yourself just to make someone else feel bigger. The audience stood in applause. Some people wiped away tears. Others smiled. For me, it wasn't just another speech. It was the truth I had fought to discover. That evening, after everyone had gone home, I walked through the quiet halls of the building. The lights reflected softly across the polished floors. I stopped in front of the wall displaying photographs from the company's earliest days. There I was, sitting alone at a tiny kitchen table. An old laptop, a notebook full of dreams. No employees, no investors, no recognition, just determination. I smiled. That young woman had no idea what her future looked like. But she never gave up. And because she didn't, everything became possible. As I stepped outside, the sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and orange. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Daniel. "Congratulations, Olivia. Today marks 10 years since you registered your company." I laughed softly. 10 years. It felt like another lifetime. I looked across the city skyline and whispered, "We made it." Not because I won against Patricia. Not because Ethan lost everything. Not because I owned a beautiful house. None of those things truly mattered anymore. What mattered was this. I had survived betrayal without becoming bitter. I had achieved success without losing my kindness. I had walked away from disrespect without losing my dignity. And I had built a life that no one could ever take away. If my story has taught you anything, I hope it's this. Never let someone else's opinion become the measure of your worth. People will underestimate you. Some will judge you. Some will try to control you. Some will even hope you fail. Let them. Keep learning. Keep growing. Keep building. Because one day, The life you create through honesty, courage, and self-respect will speak louder than any argument ever could. And when that day comes, you won't need revenge. Your peace will be enough. The end.